whole concept of a world federation as a world movement, you probably know, came out of the First World War. I mean, the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom during the First World War. They said, now what is the real cause of these wars? You know, what I mean, the whole world is slaughtering each other, and they realized that this idea of sovereign nations, or militarized sovereign nations, having no law above themselves, was fundamental to what was happening in the First World War. And of course, intellectually, the idea goes way back to the ancient Greek Stoics and so on, but it became a movement then, and it was pretty strong between the wars as a world government movement, and then again after the Second World War. Albert Camus wrote Neither Victims Nor Executioners, and in that he says we need a world parliament. He says, you know, this system of victims and executioners is absurd. We need world authority. And then there was a big conference in Montreux, Switzerland, called the Montreux Conference, 1950. And I think 500 people were there. I mean, it was really a lot of World Federalists. That was probably the high point of World Federalism. But the Montreux Conference didn't result in unity. There was like three directions that they went in. One group said the UN Charter, when the UN had just been started 5 years earlier, the UN Charter has great potential, but it's inadequate. It's not a government, and we need to work on reforming the UN. So they went to reform it. Here we are all this time later, and it has not been reformed yet, right? And they have failed substantially. Another group said we need to start with regional unions, and they started working on the European Union, and they were quite successful, you know. And then the third group said, no, what we really need is a constitution for the earth, and some of the people that eventually became WCPA were in that third group. One of the people who had been in prison during the Second World War because he refused to, he said, this is a war of sovereign militarized nations. It's not good versus evil, and he refused to go in, so he was in prison. It was Philip Isley, and so he and others became organized through the world government offices that were already there in the United States. But in 1958, they announced a new organization called the World Constitutional Parliament Association, and their goal was to write a constitution. They said, this is what the world needs. It hasn't been done yet. And so he used his considerable money he had. He and his wife organized people around the world, and they had 4 constituent assemblies. One in 1968, the first one, in Interlaken, Switzerland. And then out of that, the couple hundred people that came together there they elected a drafting committee of 25 persons and issued a series of things that needed to be included in the Constitution. So that drafting committee worked on it. They came out with a draft in 1972 and circulated it worldwide and for comments and so on. And then in 1977, they had what's now called the Second Constituent Assembly. That was in Innsbruck, Austria. And people came together, and they had a draft of the Constitution. They went over it paragraph by paragraph, and people, they were in tears at the end of that. I wasn't there. I didn't know about this movement at that time, but they said we have done something incredible for the world. Sent out copies of this to all the heads of nations, all the ambassadors in the United Nations, and they did not get any positive response. Right? And so they met again with what we call the Third Constituent Assembly in Colombo, Sri Lanka, 1979, and discussed the issue and so on. And they came out with a statement there about the rights of people to ratify this Earth Constitution, regardless of whether the nations cooperated. Right? And in Article 17 of the Constitution, there's that option. People can vote directly and elect the World Parliament and so on and get the thing going, and even if the nations are not cooperative. And in 1991, there had been between 79 and 91, there was some additional criticisms from the group that had written that about wording, small things about wording and so on. And so in 1991, they met in Troia, Portugal, and we call that the fourth and last Constituent Assembly. And in Troia, Portugal, they made some changes, and they decided, okay, it's a finished document. It's ready for the people of Earth to ratify. And I think that was a wise decision, because if it's just a suggestion, a draft, and we're offering it to you, there'll be endless debates about wording, about this idea and that idea. And the world, in our view, the world is in such a mess. And they even understood it back in 1991, right? The world is so threatened with even possible extinction of human beings, with nuclear war or whatever, that we really don't have time to debate this little sentence or that sentence. The Constitution makes ample provision for amendments. In fact, it's an evolving document. It's built right into it. In Article 18 is the requirement that once it gets started, they have to hold another Constituent Assembly within 10 years, and every 20 years after that. And in addition to that, there's facilities for making amendments in between. So it's an evolving, growing document. It's not locked in stone. And so in 1995, I'm a philosopher, and I had been writing about peace issues for years, but I had never been satisfied with all the things that I've been, thinking about. How are we going to deal with this human situation that we're in? And when I discovered this in '95, it came as a kind of a revelation to me. Yes, this is what we need to do as human beings: join together and deal with all these global problems in a real, effective way. So I worked with them. Soon I was on the executive council and so on, and we were traveling around promoting the Constitution, holding sessions of the Parliament against odds, because there are forces, or have been forces behind the scenes preventing us from being successful. I could give you one example. There are others, but in 2001, we contacted the government of Malta, and they offered to hold a session of the Provisional World Parliament. Under the Constitution, we are holding sessions of the Provisional World Parliament. Under Article 19, one of the great things about this Constitution is, in Article 17, it gives the steps for ratification. But in Article 19, it recognizes that we, the people of Earth, have the right and the duty to start it now. I mean, what are we waiting for? The world is such a mess. And so the fifth session of the Provisional World Parliament was scheduled for Malta, and the government of Malta warmly embraced us, and we reserved big hotels there. And at that time, the Secretary General and his wife had a lot of money, and we had and with that money you can organize big time, right? And so they had 400 to 500 people who wanted to come as delegates to Malta and participate in the fifth session of the Provisional World Parliament. The headquarters was in Denver, Colorado at that time, and we sent two of our employees from Denver 6 weeks ahead of time to work with the government of Malta in processing all these visa applications. It was most of the people were from Africa and such places, and they needed visas to come to Malta. So they're working, and the government assigned someone to cooperate with us, and so they're working with us, and all the applications are coming in. The information, there's things that are required, everything is, and they're laying it out, and the government is not approving these. It's said to our people there, we'll approve it all at once, but let's get it all organized first. So it gets to be 3 weeks before, 2 weeks before, 1 week before, and we're saying, okay, it's time, approve these. 2 days before it was scheduled to start, the government of Malta denied them all. Denied them all. And so when it happened, there were about 35 people who didn't need visas, like I didn't need one, and people from Europe didn't need one. So there were about 35 people who showed up there. And the big hotels that we had reserved were outraged. They said, you told us there would be hundreds of people, and they had reserved space for them. So, and this is one example. Now, the government of Malta obviously was setting a trap for us, right, and betrayed us. But behind that, we don't think Malta cares one way or the other. We think the United States is behind much of this. That when the U.S. Embassy finds out about what we're doing, they tell these little governments, we're not going to. So anyway, Philip Isley is now deceased, and his family is not interested. So I became Secretary General in 2003 at a meeting in Bangkok, Thailand, and then when the then president passed away, Terence Singh, in 2008 I became president. And I told them, I don't have a lot of money, I'm only a professor, right? And they said, nevertheless, you write about this all the time and so on. And so since 2003, we've had money problems, but we've been growing, and in the last couple of years, quite rapidly, because people are getting worried. They're aware of climate collapse now, and so on, and they're seeing this as a kind of escape route from a world that is locked into. Poor countries are locked into their poverty. Rich countries are locked into their aggression and their imperialism, and it doesn't look like there's any way out of this mess. And the Earth Constitution offers a totally new way out. A new vision. So that's what we've been doing. We've been holding. Now, under Article 19, we can start any aspect of the world government that the Constitution has now. If we have the personnel and the funding, we could start the world executive. we haven't done that, we could start any of the ministries, the Ministry of Education or the Ministry of the Environment. So we haven't done that because we don't have the personnel and the funds, but we have continued to hold sessions of the Provisional World Parliament. The Provisional World Parliament, first session of it was in 1982 in Brighton, England. Second session was in New Delhi, and it was opened by the then President of India, Sail Singh. And he said, he said in his opening statement, this is what the world needs. And it was presided over by the Speaker of the Lok Sabha, the lower house in India. So we've had very successful parliaments, and we've had less successful. Some of them, depending on the economic system in the world and the fact that many of our members are in poor countries, where it would be a year's salary for them just to pay for coming to the parliament. Some of them have not, been well attended, but what we've developed, whether they're well attended or not, we've developed a body of quality provisional world legislation. Some 68, 69 world legislative acts, and it's all online. And it's not binding on the final world parliament once it's elected, once the people of Earth ratify the Earth Constitution. But there's two things I think that are important here. One is that since the Constitution really is just a set of rules by which people can make laws, it's not a set of laws basically, but a set of rules. What this provisional world legislation does is show people the kind of world that will come out of the Earth Constitution when people are using it as the framework to make laws for addressing world problems, environmental problems and problems of militarism and so on, human rights. And so we've got this kind of model that people can look at. But the second thing is, when the World Parliament starts, the world gets worse every year, right? The climate progresses every year, and they're going to need all the help they can get, right? So they're going to have a body of quality law that is not binding on them, but they can, if they decide to, just approve whatever they want, and so on. And of course, in terms of concepts, what we're doing and what we're saying to the world is, we're doing it now. It's got to be done now, and let's look at how we can do it. We think that both being rooted in grassroots is very important, but also talking to leadership is very important, right? Both, we try to do both. And in terms of the Earth Constitution, one of the things that has been going on since the first draft was finished in 1977 is that people in organizations and potentially even governmental bodies like cities can sign it personally. They can be signatories to it. So we have many thousands of personal signatories. And to be a personal signatory, for many of us, means that we recognize that as world law. And it supersedes the law of any nation. Right? So the laws of the United States are secondary to the laws of the Earth Constitution and so on. So this is like one of the, therefore by signing it, anyone who signs it becomes a world citizen under that Constitution, right? It recognizes everyone. Ultimately, once it's ratified, anyone born on the earth will be, a world citizen legally. And so we treat each other legally as world citizens under the Earth Constitution, people that have signed it. And anyone coming to the Provisional World Parliament allows for observers. We invite governments to be observers, for example, but any delegate who wants to be a voting delegate has to be a signatory of the Earth Constitution and pledge to it. So our last session of the Parliament was in Kolkata, India, in 2014. It was a 14th session. And it was one that was not well attended. Right? Some of them have been quite successful, so maybe there were 40 people. And so I decided we better not hold any more, because with most of these parliaments, we have done our best to publicize them. And part of it is the publicity is saying this is a historical event. The people of Earth are coming together to look at the Earth under the authority of the Earth Constitution and how we can move forward. And newspapers should be picking this up and so on. And so I decided after the 14th session, we did good legislation there, but it was not good publicity, right? And so I decided we'll hold conferences in the meantime, and when we're sure that we can get delegates from around the world and make this a really impressive meeting, then we'll call the next one. And so the next year, last December in Pune, India, we had a conference, WCPA conference, called Building the World Parliament Conference. And it was well attended, it was dynamic, it was really a powerful conference. And we're working to have another one in the Delhi area this coming December. And again, I think these conferences are important. They're meetings of WCPA, but they're not parliaments. Right? Parliament, you don't present papers about how to build a world parliament. We actually consider world legislative proposals, so on. So, that's what we're doing, Francois. We've got another initiative we've got is the initiative for the Collegium of World Judges. Under the Constitution, the World Supreme Court system, which has 8 benches of the World Supreme Court, the justices for these benches come from a Collegium of World Judges, 60 judges who are highly qualified and so on. And so what we've done in the last few years is we often meet people in high court judges. You may know in Lucknow, India, the City Montessori School of Lucknow, under its leader Jagdish Gandhi, holds an annual conference of Chief Justices of the world. And we've always had, he's now on 17th annual one, and so on. And we've always had representatives there, and we go there and we talk to the justices and invite them to be members of the Collegium of World Justices. So we have maybe a dozen around the world now who are members of it. And when we get enough, and they begin organizing themselves and leading themselves, and we encourage them to, become an independent body. And once we get enough of these justices, we'll draw from them to start the first bench of the World Supreme Court system. We don't need to have the Constitution approved. We'll just set up a bench. And right now, even though there are many courts in the world, the 2 in The Hague, right? ICC and ICJ, and then the court in Latin America with the Organization of American States and various courts. None of them are truly universal courts, right? None of them have the authority of mandamus, the authority that the Earth Constitution, a real court has the power to indict people, has the power to demand that they come before the court, has the power to try people. The signatories to the Rome Statute are all voluntary, right? So the cooperation, the ICC can't indict people without the cooperation of the nations and so on. So this is, these are the kind of things we're trying to do. We're trying to start it to the best of our resources. And so right now we're raising money in India especially because we're going to be starting a global communications center in Delhi by the end of this year. And we already have space for it. One of our distinguished advisors has given us a small one-room building in downtown Delhi, very central to the power in India. And we're going to have the latest technology and experts in video streaming and global communications and social media. And this is going to be a big step forward for us. We're going to get the word out about the Earth Constitution as widely as possible. So that's where we are, right?